Hey, family, it's your sister here, Jocelyn, and welcome to another episode of Faith on the Journey. If this is your first time tuning in, we welcome you. We are so glad that you are here and want you to know that we're committed to helping you strengthen your faith, heal your heart, and discover a sense of community. And we do so through a variety of ways by connecting you with a team of Christian counselors and offering trauma healing trainings across the country. You can learn about these resources and so much more by visiting our website at faithonthejourney.org. Again, that is faithonthejourney.org. Now, today we're welcoming to the show a woman who's very familiar to our audience. This is her third time coming back, but our conversations are just so juicy. They're just so fulfilling like that. So I wanted to bring her back on the show to talk about the power of owning your mistakes. And so we're having this conversation today with Coach Dea, who is a dedicated advocate for women empowerment and skills in marriage and divorce. She's a skilled marriage and divorce coach, as well as a certified trauma healing facilitator. She has an award-winning podcast. Her platform has inspired many to change their lives, and she has a passion of helping women to live their best lives and to walk in faith. And so we're excited to welcome you here. Coach Dea, thank you for accepting my invitation.
Oh, thank you for having me once again. What a pleasure.
Yeah, well, I wanted to have this conversation with you for my audience to listen in on because we've talked about this on many occasions before in terms of the power of owning our mistakes. And before we get into the topic at hand, I would love for those who are hearing from you for the first time from our audience just to learn a little bit about you and your story.
Okay, so it's interesting when you approached me about this subject, the power of owning mistakes. It wasn't that hard to think about it as my journey as of the last 5 years has been so aligned with that very process. And it was about, owning your own mistakes have to do a lot with accountability and responsibility, right? And because I was in a healing journey, those were vital elements of healing. We have to become accountable and we have to take responsibility for the things that we did or did not do. And I refer to those as the role in our pain. Now, a lot of people may not relate to that, may think I'm speaking of blame, but this is not related to blame. It's about, it's not about what happened to you or who did what to you, but how did you take part in it? Most of the time, most of us will attest to it's a subconscious process. We don't know how we take part, sometimes subconsciously due to maybe trauma or due to other relationships. But in the end, that was a very important part of my journey is just owning, right? What was my role in my pain?
Yeah, what was my role in my pain? That is a tough question to answer. Sometimes we don't even want to ask that question. And I remember having a group with someone the other day, and they were talking about how we often, when it comes to owning our role in the pain, we'll find any other way we can to blame shift. They use the example if the cup falls off the table and we accidentally knocked it off, we'll say, "Oh, the cup fell off," not saying that I accidentally knocked it off. For whatever reason, we don't wanna take the blame for it or accountability for it, and I found myself doing that before. When I would make a mistake, it was almost subconscious, as you said, didn't even realize before I knew it, I was like, "I didn't do it. I didn't do it." And I'm like, "Wait, but you did do it. But why was your initial response to say that you didn't do it? What was that about where you just weren't open to owning your mistake?" So I want to hear from you as it relates to that. What have you learned about why sometimes we are just like afraid to take accountability for the role in our pain or our mistakes?
Well, I think because of the very word that you use, we think we're placing blame, right? So to piggyback on the example of the cup, right? So the cup getting knocked over, it's the blame, the role in your pain wouldn't have been the blame that you knocked it over. And that's why we blame shift. Well, I didn't put the cup there. The role in your pain could have been you walked too close to the table. Do you know what I mean? So it's something that you do subconsciously, intentionally or unintentionally, that allows that event to take place. So some of the things that I learned from that when I learned to make the distinction between the difference between blame and role in your pain, subconscious or not or conscious, intentional or unintentional, is things that we do, like I mentioned earlier, based on either trauma or based on events, past life events, past relationships, past ways that we engaged, even based on our core values. right? So some of the things that I learned owning my mistakes, and it was very surprising because one, I learned a lot about myself, and I think there was a growth curve with that, right? There was a learning curve and a growth curve, meaning the mistakes became the stepping stones for my own improvement. The more I understood how I operated, even if it was on a subconscious level, the more I took accountability and ownership for my way, my decisions, my choices, and how I took part in life events. So that was very enriching. The second thing is I built trust. I built trust with people. I built trust in situations. I also showed up trustworthy because I feel like when you show honesty and accountability, you strengthen relationships, right? Everything in life is about communication and relationships and access. So when I own my mistakes, I also created space to show up in a different way, to show up trustworthy. And in return, other people also kind of piggyback on that and kind of say, hey, it was not uncommon to say, you know what, I should have done this differently. And, oh, you know what, I also could have said that differently. It just created a sort of like a movement of sorts, engaging with people, enriching my relationships. The other thing is I became very good at problem solving, right? So it opens the door to fixing issues effectively because you're looking at accountability and responsibility and how you took part in it, and you start to take the blame. In fact, it's the opposite. You just remove the blame and you go into, okay, how do we become a part of the solution instead of a part of the problem? Let's stop the blame shifting. Let's not worry about how we feel about it. Let's focus on what can we do about it? What are the facts? And how do we move from here? Right. So that was very empowering as well. The other thing is, I believe that because of it, I built resilience, right? I think that you develop the ability to bounce back from those moments. I mean, anytime we make a mistake, we're bound to feel bad, right? We feel like, I wish I had done differently or had seen this. But then you're like, you know what? It's okay. You build resilience. You become more forgiving of yourself and others, right? Because when we kind of fall back when we have setbacks. Next time someone close to us has a setback, we're like, no, it's okay. It's all right. You learned from it. It just made me more forgiving in a general way. And the last thing is the aspect of empowerment. It's very empowering to take responsibility because it creates a sense of control. And I'm saying control very gingerly here, okay? Because control meaning you are in control. You get to choose how to take part in any life event, okay, any way you please. And I think that when you start becoming aware of what are the things that you are doing based on those things that you don't have control of, you automatically become in control of how to take that step next time. So your stops, any barriers, anything that when you have to own your mistakes and you feel like, well, I should have been different. Well, you have a choice. Next time, what are you going to do about it? Right. So it's very empowering.
I see. That's helpful, Dea. I like that. Now, in contrast to what you just shared, what if someone refuses to own their mistakes? What if they go down a path where they just continue to avoid or continue to not take accountability? What is the danger in that?
Well, I think I believe that everything in life boils down to two things: communication and relationships, right? So when a person refuses to have accountability and be responsible for their mistakes, they're really breaching that gift that is to engage with others. I think they'll become isolated, in some way, or they'll often feel misunderstood and angry. I think it fosters a lot of things, such as people end up falling in isolation, then they become depressed, they feel inadequate. And I think it's a way to sort of, it's very strange. It's a way to sort of keep, have like a keep off sign. It's you literally walk with your own keep away or keep off sign, and nobody can get close to you. And so it goes against that value of communication and community collaboration. I think that if a person refuses to do it, especially if you are in relationship with someone like that, it's an indication that you can no longer maintain, because at the hands of someone, especially in the area of relationships, which is my expertise, your partner, for example, refuses to be accountable, refuses to take responsibility, refuses to own to their mistakes, then you are creating that one-sided relationship where a person is working on something and the other person is refusing to take part. And that really throws off the balance of the dynamics of what a relationship with reciprocity should look like, or a relationship who has that what we call complementarianism, where you really yield to each other's needs and take turns and being kind and being respectful, all of those things.
I agree, Dea. Now, for someone who acknowledges their mistake, but they are having a difficult time accepting God's forgiveness for it, even if the person who they might have harmed, in an example like that, they've caused harm, that person's forgiven them, whatever the case may be with the dynamics, they are struggling with regret and it's consuming of them. They're on the other side of that last scenario. How would you advise that person to move through the regret to get to a place where they are able to move forward, not with their head down?
Right. So as a coach, what I usually do and work with my clients is the awareness of how we feel versus what actually is happening. So I always place that power in distinction between perception and perspective. Right. So I'll say, okay, your perception may be that you should walk in shame, that you did something that is irreparable, but it's a very fine line because they're very close, but there is a difference. So the best thing that I advise is for you to keep your eyes on actually what happened, right? You have to understand what happened, how you took part in it, which is the role in your pain or the role in whatever happened, taking responsibility and ownership. And some of the things that I advise is, number one, be direct and sincere. If you were to be upfront with someone in which you caused harm or hurt or whatever it may be, an offense of sorts, the best thing is to be direct and sincere. Hey, listen, I messed up on this situation and I take full responsibility. I think the language impacts the way that you feel too, right? So if you're sitting there and say, I'm ashamed or I should or should not, well, change the language into what can you do to be a part of the solution and not remain a part of the problem. By putting the focus on the other person, you're also taking that pain from yourself. So focus on being direct and sincere, taking ownership and responsibility. Explain and apologize. State what you did, right? And apologize for it. The icing on the cake of that is, so you can say, I'm truly sorry for, and state what you did. But the icing on the cake that closes that is say, will you forgive me? Because a lot of people have trouble with forgiveness. And by saying that, by stating that, you're giving the other person the power to decide when they're ready to open the means of communication again, to build trust again with you. And even though it feels like an uncomfortable place to be, it is very empowering to pass it on to the other person and say, hey, I know what I did. I did this wrong. Will you forgive me? The other part that I do say is, you know, maybe offer solutions. See if there are ways that you feel that you can engage differently next time. If let's say, take something simple as maybe you have a roommate and you took their car keys without asking permission and you got into a car accident, right? So maybe setting boundaries, offering solutions usually involves setting the right boundaries, and that would be boundaries for yourself that would say, you know what, I promise not to do anything that involves your property without asking permission first. So set up a bunch of things that you can say, and the way that you actually can gauge what's the right thing to do is by reverse the role. If that happened to you, what would you want the person to do? That's usually a pretty good indication of what you need to bring to the table, is by reversing, okay, if that was me, how would I feel if my roommate took my keys, and your expectations of it, right? Be open to feedback, okay, because it's always important to communicate. And you can also say, hey, what else do you think I could do differently next time? And then last but not least, the action and following through. Follow through, do what you said you would do, focus on your integrity, take the power away from shame and all of those things, right? And focus on what can I do differently? How can I grow from this? And I think that what we'll most likely find is that when we are willing to be emotionally humble and be emotionally available to any situation in life, we're going to find that we're actually a lesson to others, as opposed to you caused something bad. Yes, something did happen. Perhaps that perspective of this is a process that will enrich your communication, enrich your relationship. You're bringing more to the table than you think. For those of us who live in faith, who walk in faith, we know that we can come to God with nothing and He will give us everything and show us the direction in which we should. But if people are struggling with their faith and maybe they don't have such a great support system or people that can advise them in the right manner, keep remembering that the more focus you put in being a part of the solution, all shame aside, all feelings aside, I think that perception can hinder that process. And just go to what happened, reverse if the situation happened to you, how would you feel? And that's a pretty good way of saying, okay, I need to change some of the things that I did. Now, these things that stopped me from acting the right way can now be my steps, can be the way that I choose to proceed and take accountability and responsibility.
Very helpful, Coach Dea. And let's talk about this. Let's talk about the steps forward. You made a mistake. Yes, you're owning it now, but that doesn't have to define you. As you mentioned, it can be a stepping stone. And give some examples of how people have come back from what can seem like tremendous mistakes to build a new path forward. What have you seen, and how have you helped people to rebuild and reclaim?
Yeah, I think in general, people not only take the action based on that particular event, they take charge of their lives in a different way. So some people decide to go through some sort of coaching program, or they decide to do therapy. They decide to also dig back to see if there was anything in their lives in the past that have made them have that type of behavior, or how are they impacted. Maybe it's something that reminded them of childhood. I think it's all about taking action deeper than the eyes can see, beyond what has actually happened, right? Beyond that particular event. Because sometimes they're trivial things, but there is a root cause. What is the point of origin? So I think that I've seen people who go that way. They decide, you know what, I did something, I'm not proud of myself. Maybe there's something else I need to be looking for. Is this something that reminds me of my the relationship with my dad, or this that happened in childhood? Was I bullied? Was I abused? Do you know what I mean? There's so many layers to it. So I've seen people take responsibility in that way, taking not only ownership of the mistakes, but taking ownership of their accountability, which is even more important. So moving forward, right? It's great to own up to the mistakes, but what are we going to do from here on forward? Are we going to prevent all the mistakes? No, we're probably going to make mistakes in life, ongoing, maybe not intentionally. But I think the power of mistakes and owning up to them and recognizing what the mistakes are, is that you also have that ability to grow, right? To expect we'd never make a mistake is unrealistic, right? The perspective is, yes, we're going to make more mistakes, but hopefully each time we can fine tune the way that we engage with others and take more responsibility and be a better human. Communication and relationships, two incredible elements that are always a constant in our lives, whether it's a relationship at work, with your coworkers, family members, or whatever it may be. I don't think that relationships get better on their own. I think that they get better because people get better, right? So that if we're working on ourselves, then we are more empowered, more equipped, more resourced, right, to take part in how we engage with others.
That's very helpful. And I think about what you're saying, and even the process of not only recognizing the mistakes, owning mistakes, growing from the mistakes, but moving beyond this idea of perfection, which is something that's not real. I think for a recovering perfectionist such as myself, I think sometimes we are so afraid to making a mistake, and we have these ideas that we're supposed to be a certain way, and when we fall short, understanding that we will fall short. God sent his son to die for us for the fact that we're going to sin and make mistakes. I think we've learned, or at least I've learned, that we set ourselves up for failure when we try to be perfect. I did another interview with someone, and she said this so eloquently. She said, "We're not meant to be perfect. God wants us to be faithful. And that needs to be our goal. And in pursuing to be faithful, we will fall short sometimes, but the blood covers it all. Understanding that difference and saying the mistakes do not have to define you. It is okay. It is okay. It will happen, but it's how you get up, it's how you respond. And then I appreciate what you said, Coach Dea, about doing the work, doing the uncovering. I think it's one thing to be able to say, I made a mistake, doesn't define me, let me move forward. But if you don't take time to process that mistake and get to like why you did it and what was going on with you and getting to the root, then you can potentially keep looping back to that same mistake until you learn your lessons. That is one of the things that we have to do in order to actually grow.
Absolutely. I love what you said. I think that, when it comes to us trying to be perfect, right? And even me as well, as had my little moments of perfectionism in my life. At some point, and I'm not like that anymore. learning that, there is actually a reason why we are made perfectly in his image. He's perfect, we're not, right? We're actually great. We're given free will, and that in itself kind of allows us to have a flexibility. And I think it's not an accident, right? God knew that we were placed on earth, each with a mission, each with a purpose. But in the process of finding out what that is, we would fall, right? Without falling, we wouldn't have come to him. It's a perfect master plan, right? For us to need him, for us to seek him, we must have transgressions. Yes, the sins were covered by his blood, right? However, this is what I love to say, and this was a perspective that really helped me in dealing with when I made mistakes, understanding that there was something that I was meant to see, do, and hear that I hadn't yet. And just saying, you know what, God, whatever it is, reveal it. Reveal it. I need to see it. You and I have spoke deeply about, the process of mercy and how I believe that mercy is a transformative process, right? It's not meant to say, yeah, you can keep repeating them. And some people, I mean, the reality is as humans, we will evolve. And even as we evolve, evolving involves some repetition. So we're going to fall a couple of times in some situations, and then we're going to pick ourselves up and do better each time, right? Maybe that part of us that change and decide to grow and do things in a different way doesn't happen all at once. It's a part of a process, right? Especially if you're trying to build new habits, it takes 21 times over for us to actually create a new habit. But I think that we have that power to decide that we're growing and changing and learning. And even though we may make mistakes, remembering that we are given mercy, and that mercy is meant to be transformative. It's for us to say, it's not an excuse, but if for us to be mindful that faith, I even believe faith is preparation. Us having access to faith in such a way that even though we can't see it, we still believe it, and we get up every day, we do what we're asked to do. We leave it the rest up to God. God knows all of us inside and out, knows our intention. He knows he gave us free will, so he knows we're going to steer and detour a little bit. But having that conviction that there is something, right? Something within ourselves by the power of how we are created in divine, in as his divine creation, as his masterpiece, that we have that ability to grow from the storms that are before us. And that's why I say our stops are our steps, right? And if we look at it as we're not falling because we're failing. We're falling because we're growing. We're falling because healing is necessary. Some of us are falling because we need to go back to God, because we need to go deeper in faith, and God will reveal that to us.
That's a perspective. A lot of mindset shifting, Dea, I notice is what you do. Like you have, what did you say, perception versus perspective? What was the contrast that you used?
Perception over perspective. Perception always involves a feeling of inadequacy or fear, or I feel like you feel a certain type of way when the feeling shouldn't be a part of it. Emotions, remember, we have our dear mentor, Dr. Hammond, says, it's okay to have frustrations. Don't let the frustrations have you, meaning you're not acting out of those, right? You can have the feelings. We're human. We're going to have feelings. But to kind of look at the situation from a different perspective, and this is why I like the role switching. Put yourself in the shoes of the person whom you have offended and see how would you feel. That really helps shed light in it. Would you like if that was done to you? Well, actually, no, So I think it helps to switch places. It's a very simple way to switch places and change the perspective, right? As opposed to being stuck on perception, which usually involves a feeling. And as you know, sometimes with these feelings of inadequacy, anger, all the bad feelings, we fall into the fail of recognizing the right reasons, the right what is actually going on, grasping what was that happening for, right? Instead of, you hear a lot of say this expression, this is not my expression. It didn't really happen to you, it happened for you. Okay, what do I do with this, right? I made a mistake. I have to make sure that I, you know, own up to it. Now what? What do you do with that? And that's where that process of, having a different perspective comes in, and people take action further than what actually happened. They go for help, or they try to get to know themselves better. Some people end up resolving issues from years before. Maybe it's go back to the relationship with your dad, or go see what was it that was missing in your life, that maybe you could take a course, maybe you can read a book, maybe you can go to a class, maybe you can create a group, maybe you can find a support group, and people take action towards those things, intentionally. We all have a role in our pain, whether it's subconscious or not. But imagine how powerful it would be to have a role in your piece, right? Because that's intentional. That you have to come to that conclusion. You have to make that decision and walk a different walk.
Beautiful, Dea. Thank you for sharing this wisdom with our listeners today. Is there any final words of encouragement that you will offer before we end our time together?
Yes, I guess if I was to focus on the word mistake, right? Or disappointment, because mistakes usually lead to disappointment, whether you're disappointed in yourself or in others. I always like to say, focus on the revelation. Focus on what it is that's being shown to you, whether it is about yourself or about a situation or about others, and give yourself permission to learn and grow from it.
Give yourself permission. Thank you, Coach Dea. How can people find out more information about you?
The best way is, as you see there on my name, Coaching with Dea on Instagram. You go to my bio, I have all of my website and the things that I do there on my link tree on my bio on Instagram. So Coaching with Dea, Dea spells DEA, and that's it.
Awesome. Thank you, Coach Dea. And I'm looking forward to having an after hours conversation with you so our audience can hear more from all the things that you are doing. I thank you very much for tuning into this episode of Faith on the Journey. If you were blessed by it, you know what to do. Please leave a 5-star review and share it with a friend. Also, if you're looking for a Christian counselor, consider us by visiting faithonthejourney.org. Again, that is faithonthejourney.org. And if you loved Coach Dea, and I know it's hard not to love her, she was dropping a tremendous amount of gems. The conversation is not over. I'm actually having an after hours conversation with her on my new channel, my new Women in the Ministry channel that is focused on helping women to start transformative ministries beyond the walls of the church. So I'm going to have an interview with her just to talk about her story of starting her own ministry and all the things that are going on in her life, and to share some gems with you on if you are a woman called to ministry on how we can help you to do the same. So check out the link to that new channel in the show notes. And that is it for this episode. Thank you so much, family, for tuning in. And until next time, you stay encouraged and you keep your faith on the journey. I'll see you soon, family.